Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very latest edition of Traditionally Speaking. My name is Tom, and today my friend Joe and I are going to be talking to you about one of our favourite Christmas topics, and certainly one that will be dear to many people's hearts, the board game.
The cause of many a relationship strife here.
Well, absolutely. Can anything be said to cause more arguments at Christmas time than, a little bit of slight discord over Monopoly or any of the other favourite board games that we like to play?
It's even worse than trying to pick a Christmas movie that everybody can agree on.
Well, the interesting thing about board games, and it's certainly a long-running tradition that I think both of our countries have enjoyed for a long time, is the fact that, in terms at least of the games that we enjoy, there seems to be a lot of crossover between North America and the UK. A lot of the old favourites that have been played for decades seem to still be enjoyed now, not least Scrabble, Cluedo, or Clue as it's called in America, and Monopoly, which seems to be a perennial favourite.
Yes, along with like Life and of course, various card games as well. But more on the board games, I would say Monopoly is by far the number one game in America, and I believe it is in Scotland too, isn't it, Tom?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the interesting thing about it, actually, is the fact that there are obviously regionalised versions of it for all of the various different cities and towns in and around the UK. As you say, in Scotland, there's editions for Edinburgh and Stirling and Glasgow and all of those places. But it's also the fact that, it's that core gameplay, that kind of strategic economic gameplay that really is what interests people. And I think that's why people keep coming back to it.
And I'll tell you, there's a lot of family variations when they play the game too. And that's what's kind of fun too, is they can kind of change the rules a little bit and adapt it to what they want to do on the games. But also you mentioned the cities and towns, but don't forget the movies and different things that they've also made Monopoly games out of, such as Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, etc. So, and of course, for Christmas, you can even get an elf Monopoly game based on the movie Elf.
And doesn't that say everything about the versatility of Monopoly? Is, always irrespective of the particular theme of the game, it's that addictiveness, it's that gameplay and that competitiveness that keeps bringing people back to it.
And there's so, again, anytime you get a family group together and you're trying to decide how to keep them entertained, the board games have to come out.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their favourite. I mean, for me, it's probably Scrabble, because it's one of those games that I think always has everybody reaching for a dictionary at one point or another.
Yeah, and of course he's an author, folks, so he's got a vast grasp of vocabulary. So that's why he likes Scrabble so much. He could probably whoop a lot of people's butts on that one.
And let's not forget Cluedo as well. I don't know whether it started in the UK or the US, but I know that certainly Clue is how it's better known now, because everybody remembers that fantastic Jonathan Lynn movie from the mid-80s starring Tim Curry.
Absolutely. That talk about an iconic movie. That's absolutely wonderful. And I'll tell you, I think it did a huge resurgence on the game itself, because it had been fading from the American market until that movie came out, and then all of a sudden it was all over the place again.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly spawned a TV show over here, a kind of spin-off with John Pertwee, who had been Doctor Who in the 1970s, and had a very different cast, but I mean, that was very successful as well.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's amazing. I mean, can you imagine how many movies the board game Monopoly has shown up in?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it says everything about how popular that board game has been and how ubiquitous it is with board games. That it shows up everywhere.
And it's amazing that that game came out of the Depression, and actually that's what it was for. It was the first real estate game where you could play along and try and become a tycoon by when everybody was barely being able to put a plate of beans in front of them. So, and to have that go all these years So you figure that came out in the 1930s, and it's about ready to celebrate its 100th anniversary.
Yeah, I mean that's the amazing thing about it. I imagine is because it's always kept up to date. I mean, there's an electronic currency version now, where you use a swipe card rather than the paper money, those kind of things. But the dynamics, I think, are what continues to fascinate people. Is that aspect of competitiveness where you want to get these properties just in the right place so that your competing players are going to end up landing there and have to pay you money and those kind of things. That's going to be, I think, what's going to make people's Christmas. that idea of a bit of friendly competition.
Well, and then that brings up an interesting point too. I mean, we've seen somewhat of a decline in board games here because of all the video games that are out. And, most kids now would prefer to play on the computer, and that since they can do it with literally anybody from anywhere in the world, that has become kind of a replacement for board games. But it's still kind of fun when families get together that you can do a board game and bring everybody in. And it doesn't matter from grandma and grandpa down to the younger kids, and, play a game together and kind of keep everybody together. Still big in Scotland, right?
Yeah, I mean, people do enjoy the classics. I mean, you get Snakes and Ladders, Ludo. There's a game Drafts over here. I think it's checkers in America, and of course chess as well. I mean, these are games that are popular all the year round. But I think there's a special significance to playing them at Christmas. It's one of those times a year where you really can have a bit of downtime and enjoy those kind of pursuits.
Well, and it is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of new board games with a Christmas theme to them. In fact, we even have a kind of a version, it's called "'Tis the Season," and it's kind of a Trivial Pursuit kind of game where it's got like 1,800 questions about Christmas, and it involves, some of the more popular movies like Elf and, Christmas Story and Christmas Vacation. But it also talks about the traditions and how they came about and the certain ways that we celebrate. And that's kind of a fun one. But then you're also seeing, as I mentioned to you before we started this, they have a Christmas Story one and a Christmas Vacation one where you have cards and you're untangling lights.
Well, I think we've all been there.
Yeah. Here, Russ, you work on that. Yeah, and there's several other variations, not just based on movies, but also different Christmas things. Like Santa's sleigh, which is kind of a Pictionary kind of thing that you can do. So you're seeing a lot of new games appear, not only with a Christmas theme, obviously, but especially at Christmas, you see a bunch of them come out, which makes it fun and kind of brings the family unit back together again. And I think that's what's so important. Those are the kinds of traditions you really have to continue to work on.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what intrigues me about it is because I mean, you mentioned games like Trivial Pursuit. You get games like that. You get games like Mousetrap and Operation, which really are not just popular Christmas presents because these games can be played at any time of the year, but they have become for many people entwined with Christmas because they enjoy playing them or they remember having been given them as gifts. But really, I imagine there is a kind of very diffuse line between Charles Dickens and the Victorian parlour games at Christmas, leading up to the popularity of board games in the early half of the 20th century. And it kind of embeds, if you like, the idea of the Christmas game as being part of everyone's festive celebrations.
Absolutely. And that here again, and as I was alluding to, when you can get the family together, this is a great way to spend time together without, having lagging conversations and that kind of thing. Although, as we also talked about, it's also a good way to get everybody upset with everybody. You're cheating. And
Yes.
sometimes it has the opposite effect of what you were hoping for.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, I think there have probably been more wars started over Christmas board games than just about any other thing.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. So,
Yes.
and I'd love to hear from our listeners, what are some of the games that you guys enjoy and what's your family favorite? And do you still play? Or have those been shelved to a cabinet that never gets opened again? I mean, I used to love playing games when I was younger, and I used to play everything, card games, board games, you name it. I mean, I was a big cribbage player, and I particularly enjoyed pinochle and that kind of thing, as well as the board games. And we had pretty much all of them. In fact, one of my favorite games still today is we actually have a Lord of the Rings board game, where you're actually one of the halflings trying to get to Mordor and cast the ring off. And I'll tell you, I used to play that with my kids and stuff when we were younger, and boy, we'd be at it for hours and hours. So, and I like that one because everybody has to work together as opposed to working separately, like you do like with Sorry or some of the other games where you're always knocking somebody else back.
Yeah, and I mean, just as important as what kind of games you like to play at Christmas, I imagine is the question of how you like to play them. Because, I mean, as you rightly said, more and more people now are communicating digitally. But it's nice to think that people are still playing games like, chess or variations of Scrabble and those kind of things over the internet, sometimes over long distances.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that keeps families going if you can do this. I mean, and just your friends as well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having your friends over and playing a lively board game. And as long as you don't go to blows with each other by the end of it, you're doing fine.
And of course, that leads us to the other question of Christmas board games, which is, of course, when people remember a game that no one else does. Because there's always a really obscure board game that someone remembers and everyone else just kind of looks at them askance as if to say, I don't remember playing that.
Yeah.
For me, it was a game called Scruples, which came out about 1986. I think it was a Parker Brothers game. It was only available for a few years, but it was quite a controversial game because it actually started more fights than Monopoly did. But
Is
basically,
that
what happens is,
possible?
well, you may wonder, but basically what happened was you were asked a question, and the point of the game was to try and find out who amongst the players was the most scrupulous. So you might be asked a question along the lines of you're invited to a friend's dinner party. They show you their brand new all white three-piece suite. When they go to get some nibbles for the party, you accidentally drop some red wine on their brand new suite. What do you
Ooh.
do? And you get this question, you see, of, well, do you admit that you did it? Do you turn the cushion over so that they can't see that you've done it? Uh, you know, all of those kind of questions. And then, of course,
I'm not answering.
it very quickly reveals more about yourself than you ever wanted to reveal.
Yeah, really. That's almost as bad as Truth or Dare. So, wow, man. Well, and I'd be interested to hear again from our listeners. Do you still play board games? And what are your favorites? And what do you recommend, or what's a good game for families to play together that doesn't cause hard relations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point because it's often said now that with the dawn of mobile devices and constant communication, that there's less time for get-togethers and games. But in actual fact, they've had a bit of a renaissance in recent years, and more people now are enjoying games. I mean, I think for instance about the Queen's Gambit. The Walter Tevis adaptation that was recently shown with Anya Taylor-Joy, that's brought so many people to chess that might otherwise not have played it.
And that seems to have a resurgence every so often and through history where it kind of starts to fade out, and then you get some of these chess masters, and they're showing how they play and such, and then you get a sudden resurgence. And I love to see that, because it's like things like this should not fade from our tradition.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, there's so much to be said for the role of board games and popular games in our popular culture, and it's interesting to see just how important they are, and to both our countries. Because here in Scotland, it's something that's some games are enjoyed more at Christmas and at other times of the year. But it's nice to see these things making a comeback, and I'm sure it's the same in America as well.
Absolutely, especially with all the weather we've been having around here. There isn't a whole lot much else that you should be doing. So you don't want to be out shopping, or playing outside in the weather we've been having.
Yeah, yeah, it's true, and I mean, it's good that it's actually brought people back to some of these older games that sometimes have been forgotten about. Because it's only just been recently I've discovered that there's a whole culture out there of people who really enjoy playing these board games of yesteryear. And obviously you get things like jigsaws, which are perennially popular, but these games that perhaps might only have been produced for a year or two very much have their diehard fans.
And that's again, the neat thing is, it doesn't matter how old the game is, whether it's as old as Monopoly or one of the more recent games. It's always fun to pull it out and get the group together, get the family together and do this. And it brings us all closer, and it helps us all remember the joy we have in each other.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Because as with so many of these things, yes, it's important to enjoy the game, but the most important thing, of course, are the people that you're playing it with and the good times that you can share when you're doing it.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say we've covered this pretty well, Tom. You have any
Yeah.
last thoughts on this?
Yeah, only to say that we would love to hear from anyone, just as you mentioned, that would like to share with us their favourite board games, or perhaps if they know a board game that's cruelly been left behind by the passing years, but probably deserves a resurgence.
And the best way to do that is reach us at www.traditionally-speaking.com, and give us your thoughts and your interests on this. We would love to share this with our other listeners, and see what you have to say.
So thanks so much, Joe, for your thoughts on this perennially interesting topic. Because let's face it, when it comes to something like Monopoly, I don't know anyone who isn't competitive, or who doesn't take it super seriously. So from that point of view, it's always a pleasure to discuss these things with someone who always enjoys all the different Christmas traditions and knows just how important games are as part of that wider discussion of the festive season.
Well, I'll tell you what, Tom, you have my promise. If Mary and I come out to Scotland, we'll play Monopoly. But if you come out here, you have to play "Tis the Season." Give me a chance to fight back.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, well, folks, thanks for tuning in again. We appreciate the time you spend with us, and we hope you get a lot of fun out of these.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope that you'll tune in again soon.
Until next time.